Hello, in this video I'll be going over sketching industrial products with the NASA JPL Mars Rover as an example. As always, I start off with side views to understand the proportions of whatever it is I'm sketching. I sketched 3 different rovers, and at the end of it I decided the Mars Exploration Rover's Spirit and Opportunity were the ones I preferred to sketch. So after these side views, I do some quick pen sketches to start the 3D work and finding the big shapes of the objects, doing multiple sketches from different views to help me understand the product as much as possible. You can see me putting the reference photos that I'm using in the corner of each page here. Again, big shapes, boxes, and cubes are what I'm searching for, and I'm ignoring all the small details at first. This little top view, right, I don't actually have a reference of. I'm using the references that I have from side views to sketch that in there and try and imagine what those look like. It's going to help me as I try and sketch the those solar panels in 3D. Finishing off with some small little sketches, even if I've done them before, just to see if I have a better understanding of those products. Alright, so now on this second page here, I am going to start off with marker, and I'm going to sketch a view that I like the most from my reference. I am going to start with marker first. I've slowed the video down to a normal speed to illustrate the time and patience I take in constructing the initial simple forms of boxes and cylinders that make up this rover. And again, those initial studies that I've done pretty strongly reinforce to me that this thing is mostly boxes and cylinders. Not a lot of other simple forms like wedges in there. A few, but not many. And I'm taking the time to rotate the page to help me with crisp, clean lines to make the perspective as good as possible. All of this will be rewarded later on down the line, if I start off with good, strong perspective. The product is very complex with all the wires and components, so I'm searching for the biggest, most pronounced shapes. Initially in that box, I'm drawing a box as the main body, even though if we look at the reference, there really isn't a clear box there. But it's just a placeholder to sort of bound the components that I'll put in later on. It's hard to see in this sketch here, but I do have a lot of little dots I'm putting all over the place, and that helps me as I'm setting up my perspective of like where I want to draw my lines to in terms of how long they are. So that, again, it's a little more work, but it helps in getting those proportions down, transferring them to 3D. I'm drawing the little control panel here, not control panel, observation, optical observation, and I'll start off with a center line, and then the ellipses, and then the outer lines for that, and the same thing for the head at the top of it. And center line, rotate the page, ellipses. I am orienting my hand in line with that minor axis to help me get the correct degree on those ellipses. That back one is a little off. I believe we'll see me kind of correct it just a bit later on, as I realize that's off when I rotate the page back, and doing this little box on the top where all the components are going to sit in there. Dividing it up a little bit. And taking my time, not at the same time not overthinking it too much, and getting those details in there. I'm searching for those biggest details, how to represent them, and then keep moving. And now I'm about to speed this up to about 20 times speed, because I'm going to do exactly what I did before, but just repeated. Overall, this entire video represents about 1.5 hours of sketching, but I've sped it up just because after seeing the time that takes me to do some of the smaller sections, you can start to appreciate what I'm doing in the rest of it. But we can just go through it to see roughly how I construct it and get to some of the later elements of here, right? So even with these like little legs that the wheels are attached to, again, I have minor axes and cylinders around them. Going in for some of the big components that are down underneath it, right? So where it started off as a large box, I've started to break it up into some smaller components, not too small. When I eventually get to pen, I will do more of that. Right, again, so here is this observation component right here, lots of cylinders inside of it, a little cone there at the bottom, and some other small details. Again, not spending too much time with being photorealistic with it, just getting the feeling for these large components that make it up. The wheels right here, I'm about to start. I don't actually have a specific reference for them, like in this angle, so I'm using some of my existing references to try and understand the wheels. I'm doing these sketches to try and sketch them larger. If I can get any more details in there, then I go into sketching the solar panel. Again, I don't actually have a reference for the solar panel from this top view like this. I'm looking at some of my 3D images to extract these details from it. And lastly, filling out a little antenna on the side there to make this the balance on this page. I don't have this odd space on the side, and then antenna will fill the space up nicely. Is it the most interesting thing on there? There's a couple more interesting areas I find, but this is what I'm left with in terms of the space that I had left for how I planned this page. Okay, so now going over to pen, and again slowing it down to about 1 time speed on this for the first, I believe, 3 minutes or so, and that is again to illustrate the time and the space that I'm taking with it, right? I've already established good perspective with the marker, so I can work with the pen a little bit faster. This product has a lot of detail, and I anticipate using that to cover up any small errors that my pen work has. I'm not trying to do an exact photo replica. One moment, right? So I just dimmed my marker layer, because what happens to the marker when we use it is that it starts to get a little more translucent as it dries up. So I do the same thing digitally to represent that here. But back to the pen, right? It has a lot of detail, and I am just looking at, getting the feeling with some of these quick lines. I'm not worried about, again, a portrait photoreal representation. I'm still trying to move fairly fast with this, because if we took our time to be super precise, this would take 5 hours maybe, and that would be a wonderful 5 hours in terms of the quality of the end drawing. But I don't have 5 hours. I need to sketch a lot of things. So with my marker as a guideline, putting the pen work in there. Rotating the page to find comfortable angles to sketch components. Right, those little ellipses right there are feeling a little off, a little flat. They're not as open as they should be. But the details, this is such a small section on the page, right? It's not too big of a worry, because we're gonna have so many details on here. like that's not the first thing we're going to look at. Overall, we're going to see the entire thing together and appreciate that versus focusing on this one little area. I have a little opportunity right here to add like material thicknesses, so it's like double lines next to each other on the product. Sketching elements that are closer to us first so that I can draw those fully, and then the other lines that would like sort of disappear behind them. All right, lots of little boxes and components for electrical components, various sensors that seem to have cylindrical outputs to them, whether they are temperature sensors or IR sensors or video sensors. But capturing all of those, again, very quickly without too much detail. If you pay attention closely, you can see me sometimes put little dots down to figure out, where I want to draw my lines and where they're going to go to. In this very small area, you don't see me rotating the page as much either, because these lines are so small that I probably just move my arm a little bit to work around that, because it's not worth moving the page back and forth that much in this small little area. And now, speeding this up, sketching the rest of it. Again, you'll see me like sketch lines, but then even go over some of them. There are so many little details here that one little like double line is not going to be the end of it. In sketching all these components, I'm searching for, again, components that are in front first to draw those. Then I'm also searching for prominent components to sketch those, because they are the first thing we see. And after that, I will fill in like small spaces in between them. You'll often see me in this at various points doing like little dots that represent things like bolts and nuts on this. But overall, again, I move pretty fast, and again, searching for the larger details first, and then if there's still space in there, capturing some of the smaller details in there. Working again from front to back, things that are closer to us, so that when there's any overlap with the lines, ideally I don't have to cross the lines over too much against each other, and that allows me to have some depth through occlusion, which occlusion being like something in front blocking something behind it. And those little sensors that I imagine are sensors right there, not exactly what we're looking at in the reference, but putting them in there and again filling small spaces that have lots of details in them with many overlapping lines and components, and at the same time areas that don't have too much detail, trying to keep those relatively clean and smooth and pen free to help indicate the feeling of looking at this thing where there are many details versus the areas where there are few details. And that is mostly for sketching industrial things, right? I search for the big components first, then go in and fill it with small details. Where there are areas with many details, right, I fill in that detail to make it feel full and complex. Where there are areas where there are nice smooth forms and shapes and they're very open, I try not to put that much detail there to again make it feel, emphasis on that feel, like the product I'm looking at, not trying to represent this thing as photorealistic, because that would just take too much time. And and particularly like this last little area right here, we can see me adding details that were not there in the original marker, because I didn't notice it at first, but now as I'm spending more time with it, I'm catching just smaller and smaller little components in there. Again, the solar panel doesn't have any reference. I'm just using a 3D view to get all these details in there. Little patterns, and that's it. All right, as I finish this up, I hope this has been informative to you.